So the oldest known account of the Great Flood is actually the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Epic of Gilgamesh was written in 2000 BC, according to the University of Idaho, and it was written by Sumerian culture. It was not written by Greek culture. The Greek culture didn't even come around until around 1600 BC, which is a full 400 later than the purported time that the Epic of Gilgamesh was written. Now, there's also the Epic of Atrahasis. The Epic of Atrahasis tells the flood story, whereas the Epic of Gilgamesh talks about the flood story. We don't know if the Epic of Atrahasis is older than the Epic of Gilgamesh, written at the same time, or written afterwards. The Epic of Atrahasis may have been included with the Epic of Gilgamesh, but the tablets that we have of the Epic of Gilgamesh were fractured, and that part of the story could have just been lost because it just simply wasn't with the tablets. But we have I think around 700 BC, we have complete accounts of both the Epic of Atrahasis and the Epic of Gilgamesh that we're able to read, but we have older tablets indicating that story had been around for a long, long time. Like I said, the Epic of Gilgamesh was in existence a full 400 years before the Greek civilization existed. Now, the Epic of Gilgamesh just contains accounts of like Noah and a little bit of the flood story, whereas the Epic of Atrahasis talks about the creation events and why the flood happened and the account of the flood itself. Now, there is nothing about that that invalidates the story of Noah at all. I mean, the names may be different. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. Belzazar, I think, is what Noah is called in the Epic of Gilgamesh. I'm trying to go off of memory right here. I think his name is Balthazar in the Epic of Gilgamesh. But anyhow, names may be different, but names change when you go from one country to another, one language to another. The other thing is, it actually kind of validates that something did indeed happen, that there was some form of great flood. So there is some validation to it. And the reason why that provides a validation is we have different people giving an account of it. Could it have been that a great flood really did happen, flooded the entire world, and the Sumerians are a descendant of the people that survived the flood, a.k.a. Noah, or a.k.a. Balthazar, as a Sumerian name would have been. And they're each giving their accounts that were passed down to them by their forefather Noah, a.k.a. Balthazar. Or was it just a localized flood and the Sumerians survived in an area that wasn't actually covered by the flood? And in fact, there's some Jewish teachers that taught in some older writings that the city of Jerusalem, or where Jerusalem is, was never touched by the great flood of Noah, and therefore they were confirming that was probably a localized flood. Or is it just a story that teaches us something and the great flood never happened? Now, archaeologically, we know great floods or mega floods happen all the time in the geologic record. There could have been a mega flood event. I've heard something about there being a Mediterranean, some sort of like seawall, natural seawall, and during a storm event or something, the Mediterranean broke over that seawall and then flooded an entire region down there, which could have been the source of Noah's flood. I don't know if there's actual real geological evidence for that, but that's something that I've heard about. You got to be careful with some of these so-called geological evidences out there by so-called biblical scholars, like the whole finding chariots in the Red Sea to say that the crossing at the Red Sea happened here, and that was a hoax that someone made up. There's no actual archaeological evidence for the crossing at the Red Sea. But the point is, we have these verbal traditions or written traditions, and they cross cultures, which indicates something probably happened. The thing about legends you always got to remember is that legends sometimes contain truth to them. They may be mostly legends and embellished with all sorts of bells and whistles, but sometimes in those legends there's an element of truth in there you have to pull out. And since the common theme across all these different cultures was that a great flood happened in that region, indicates there probably was some sort of mega flood that happened in that region. It was probably actually localized. But ultimately, we got three ways to look at the story of Noah and the Great Flood. One, it actually happened and it was a worldwide catastrophe. Two, it actually happened, but it was a localized catastrophe because to the ancients, the world was the area that you surveyed, and anything beyond the area that surveyed had monsters and demons and dragons and things like that. You know, sometimes map makers would put the dragons and stuff off the borders of the map because they didn't know it was out there. But the whole world was the part of the map that they surveyed. Or three, it's just allegory meant to teach us a lesson. It wasn't something that actually happened. It was just something to teach us a lesson about how God is, or to teach us a lesson about what happens to people that do wrong and how people who are good get preserved or something like that. But anyhow, back to the original point. No, the Greek any Greek flood myths do not predate the original flood myths. The original flood myths, or the oldest ones that we have account from, come from Sumerian culture. And yes, the Epic of Gilgamesh predates the story of Noah, but the story of Noah kind of parallels what's in the Epic of Gilgamesh. It does not mean one invalidates the other. What it means is that probably something did happen, and different cultures were recording in their stories that event that happened.